Hey there. I decided to do a live weekly update today on July 15th, after all, because it seemed like an important thing to do. But part of it is that July is just such a busy month. I know that in the next 2 weeks I'm not going to be able to do a live, and I didn't want to leave a 3-week gap without sharing something. So I was thinking about some of the stuff that came from last week's live when I was like ranting about AI and philosophy, and then the week before that when I was talking about philosophy in general and how I became a philosopher. And I was like, what do I want to share in light of this? And because the intention behind a space such as this weekly update, unscripted, raw, unfiltered, just me sitting here yapping. The purpose of this is really to share in real time. And so as I was like getting ready this morning and watering the garden and making breakfast, I was trying to think about what felt like it was coming up a lot over the past few weeks that would be worth kind of touching on a little bit more, or something like a theme that I didn't quite get into as fully as I could or would like to. And the theme that came up was actually my relationship that I've been building with the universe. I say it a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but I do also mean it. And let me give you some context for where this is coming from. Part of my birthday stand-up philosophy special, The Get Gadfly, was kind of like culminating in this share about a long-term committed, secure relationship that I've been developing over the past several years. And it has been a relationship that has taught me the most. I've healed the most in it, and I've really felt myself shift and grow into being able to just like move very differently because of it. And that relationship, of course, is with the universe. And it's funny because like I know a lot of people in my own personal life who like refer to the universe as like this entity that they are also in intimate, close relationship with, that they listen to, or they're like, the universe is trying to say something to me and I don't quite know yet exactly what it is. But I know that this is like it's like a way that people make meaning of their experiences in life, just whatever the universe is up to, especially when there's this mystery or ambiguity that like maybe it's because the universe is something so vast, so large, so unknowable, a sort of in many ways metaphor because we don't really understand it. It's like a placeholder for this something that contains so much beyond our own scope of knowing. So the universe is this almost like, I think it's almost like, I don't know, we can playfully refer to it as an entity or a thing to be in relationship with, but I have a hunch that it's referring to something more kind of fundamental to our existence of what we do not know, and then how we relate to that in particular. But there's also this level of being with the universe that comes from a place of deep knowing. So it's not just like, I don't know what the universe is saying, and I'm clearly I'm getting a message, but I can't quite make sense of it. There's something else that like we read the universe and go like, that is clarity. That is a signal or confirmation or affirmation of something that I do have some inkling around. So it's funny to me the way that the universe also grants clarity in the way that we talk about it or relate to it, or just kind of situate ourselves and orient our lives in connection to the universe. I know that a lot of this sounds like very woo-woo, and I don't know, I don't really judge that because, again, I think we're all just trying to make meaning of stuff that's very complex. And I'm not saying that it's all just like made up either. I think that there is clearly some very concrete reality to the ways that we understand the world too, that maybe don't have to have certain types of explanations that fit a standard of what counts as like truth and knowledge based on Western objective scientific frameworks that are always changing anyway. So anyway, all that is to just say, we exist in a far more sophisticated realm of knowing and not knowing than a lot of people are comfortable with even trying to comprehend, let alone like sit within their feelings. And sometimes I think that a lot of the times, actually, maybe most of the time, we use concepts or ideas or language to like indicate this acknowledgement of what is so vast and much more expansive than our little old selves. And that can look like a lot of things. Sometimes we call it something like God, or sometimes we call it something like source or spirit or the universe or something like, but I mean, so many things, so many traditions will refer to this reality by a different name. So I have adopted the language of referring to the universe as a way for me to make meaning of my own experiences in the past several years. And why I found that so helpful is not because it's like this trying to like wrap my mind around something that is too big to comprehend, but more for me, it's been helpful to be able to like put myself in relationship with that expansiveness. So by developing my relationship with the universe over the past couple of years, like I said, it's been a place of like really great learning and growth, and I kind of just want to talk about that. So let's see. Do I need to do more context setting before getting into it? Probably. My impulse is always, yes, more context. I want to give a little bit of context for why I think that this is significant, and I'll give nods to like some other things that are coming up. You know, have you paid attention to notions of like collective consciousness, or I think I've referred to this several weeks ago, of that phenomenon where like you have an idea and you realize other people have a similar idea. You're like, how is that possible? We don't even know each other, or we're not talking in some kind of exchange with one another, but we've come to similar kinds of like places in our own thinking and learning. I don't think that that is so wild and like surprising, honestly. I think that there's a lot, like I remember several weeks ago I was saying, if we're paying attention to what's happening, if we're reading sort of the room of our world, then there will be people who pick up on similar kinds of patterns and then synthesize those happenings and kind of end up moving in a similar direction towards similar ideas or conclusions, in a way that doesn't have to be that we are in intimate exchange with one another, but more just kind of like moving similarly. Those are the people who are like aligned with you, or the people who share similar values and thoughts, and also are on a similar learning journey, even just as part of like our own particular representations of humanity. Where I see some of those overlaps happening with my work and my own process and what I have seen in other people, just kind of, you know, maybe it's the algorithm feeding me echo chambery kind of stuff, or maybe it's, you know, something a little bit more grounded in shared human values and creativity and consciousness. But there are several things that I have seen over the years of like work, like particularly someone who goes by the name of Care and has accounts and workshops under the name of the Erotics of Liberation. That's one person in particular who I have kind of been open to learning with based on what they share on social media. And then there are other people who similarly come from like a liberation sort of framework, and where so much of that content that folks like those people are sharing lands is really on the important level of interpersonal relationships, specifically often around conflict and accountability and repair, and why that is so essential for us if we're to think and understand any possibility for liberation. So I resonate with a lot of that work, particularly because so much of my thinking and my own reflection really does center on like the space between us and what happens in that space of relationship. I don't often use the language of conflict, repair, or abolition. I don't often situate it in a framework of transformative justice or anything that like maybe sounds a little bit more common, I guess. I don't know. I see it happen because then people could be like, here's a workshop, here's a workbook, take my course on how to navigate conflict and repair in our relationships so that we can build. And I don't disagree with any of that. I think that what has been helpful for me to see so many people using similar language, and then my own work echoing the realm of like what is so important about this space of our relationships for liberation. The difference that I think I'm coming in with is that I'm focusing on what we can learn and know in that space too. So yes, accountability, repair, conflict navigating, all of that, and acknowledging the ways that generational trauma animates and shows up, but also reflecting on like the wisdom and the crucial embodied practices that can carry us into a different space when we are grounded in that space of our true, real, intimate relationships. Yes, 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 yes. Again, I think that because of my philosopher epistemological angle on it, I tend to approach that from a place of what we can learn, what we can know, and do use the language of that being some sort of like healing process too. Not from a place of like everything is a wound, but at least in the space of like being able to move through our lives and relationships in the world with greater capacity, different skill that gives us more options for how to do it in a way that we want to do it. The sort of stepping into our aspirational modes of being. I think that to me is much more about healing. It's that becoming who we want to be. So sure, there are wounds that can be healed and repair after rupture that can be sort of forged through certain practices. But I don't find myself grounding or starting from a place of rupture or wound a lot. So I'm just trying to say there are some like distinctions from how I notice my own thought patterns when I hear and really resonate with the work of so many other people who are using similar kind of language. I'm saying all of that because if I'm going to be talking about a relationship with the universe, then that can sound so opposite of, the grounded, intimate, personal, like one-on-one or small group or like deeply entrenched in our real, actual, fleshy, embodied relationships that build our communities. And then there's the universe way out there. So I want to talk about that because I think same. These are all helpful frameworks for thinking about the practices that can enable us to become, more of who we want to be. But I said I wanted to talk about my relationship with the universe. So I want to say a little bit about that. I'll get there eventually. You know how this goes. We're just going to find our path along the way. Let me say, I'm kind of just stopping right now because I'm trying to think of, I could go a couple directions. One, I'm working on new pages, and that itself was a revealing process for me about like writing and how I'm trying to step into this other, more expressive mode of doing that. There's this other piece about revolution. These are connected because the pages were for romancing the revolution. People still have questions about what do we mean by romance? And then I think it'd be helpful to still clarify, what do we mean by revolution? What does that look like? That is connected to liberatory work that can be found in the ways that we approach our relationships. So all of this is like this netted web of connected realities, experiences, and practices. Of course, they're not separate. There's also the threads that I still want to be pulling on from the past couple of weeks of what I was sharing, particularly of where I ended last week about like, do we need AI? And people think it's inevitable if we're just like steamrolling our way into the future horizon where AI is everywhere. Is that inevitable? I don't think so. But how did we even get here? I was thinking about this and kind of listening to some of what I said last week. And I feel like it might be helpful to also talk about like why it matters so much to focus on what we can create, even when it feels so small. I keep doing this. I keep finding myself like going to these small, grounded little opportunities and moments that happen in us and within us with real people, real relationships. And I know that sometimes that feels like it's also in direct conflict with like the vastness of the crises that we are facing right now on a large scale. So that's like being in a relationship with the universe, this totally enigmatic and like a noble expanse that far like exceeds our comprehension. And then there's also the vastness of the challenges and the threats that we are facing. But then there's these like tiny little places where we can put our attention to, and it's the question one might ask is like, so is that where the revolution happens? Is that really where we should be focusing on when the problems are so big? And I'm going to say yes right now. I'm going to say yes because I feel like that's where we have access to do something. And I'm not just trying to minimize the opportunity. I do think that's sort of the necessity of how things get built. And one phrasing that was sticking with me from last week was about AI, when I said the only reason why we even have AI right now is because it came from ideas, beliefs, and values that people held that then built and pursued. Like, AI did not exist 100 years ago. Not in the way that we know it, not in the way we're thinking of it, not in the way we're experiencing it right now. And so it became a material reality that we are confronted with, and it's just like ubiquitous in so many places within our systems and technologies, and even being like incorporated into our expectations of practices within our institutions, like jobs and how we think we have to operate. It something that is actually so immaterial. Like, I can't point to AI right now, but it is embedded in my consciousness, my words, and the ways that we are like experiencing our reality currently. All of that came to be through still a long process of people putting their beliefs, ideas, and thoughts into actions to become material, despite the fact that we can't point to it right now. I think that might actually be like a really important framework to think through, just because it gives something that we can like put some weight behind of, this is how something truly like radical in the way of like so far from what we know has become real. And when the counter example or the counter belief that like sort of negates the possibility of something so promising as revolution or liberation, if that feels so intangible and so radical from anything that we have known, like, do you see what I'm trying to get at? There's like some mirroring here, but one manifestation of that kind of process is AI. Another manifestation of a similar kind of process could be liberation. I don't think that we have to be so discouraged by the idea that like something seems so far-fetched from where we are right now, when like the reality we're currently in is also pretty far-fetched. You know what I mean? It didn't come from nowhere, but I hope you're following in terms of the materiality of like what is possible. So the revolution being something that can happen in the smallest spaces of ourselves and in our relationships, I do think is very crucial. I think there's a good reason why so many people right now are finding themselves talking about exactly this. And it's not just because this is where we have a semblance of influence and control or like choice of how we move. That's for sure important and part of it. But I think it also is because it is actually the building block of how so much changes. So I ended last week by talking about like, if you want to change the world, change yourself. And that whole like nearly cliche adage that is just found across so many different wisdom traditions, so many different places, and people land on exactly that sentiment. And I think that whether it's a fractal or it's just like what we can do, I do think it's what we must do. And so to me, that gives a lot of encouragement. It's like we can start here. So the here that I'm talking about now is that space of our relationships, the choices that we make in terms of how we want to practice moving through them differently. I'm going to say a little thing that has kind of been on my mind lately. I haven't exactly expressed this before, but it's been really important to me recently. And that is that when I talk about learning all the time. It might be like the thing of my philosophy. It might have emerged as one of the most prominent themes of all of my work over the past 7 or so years. It's just become like the core of so many branches of what I do. I'm thinking of like learning as almost like the core of the trunk of a tree, or the xylem within a stem that carries the water and nutrients. Learning is sort of like the passageway, the channel, the vessel, the mechanism through which so much happens in my frame of reference. And then the healing that comes from that is coupled with it too. Again, healing in the way that I was talking about earlier, not necessarily healing a wound directly and only that, but the healing that enables us to become who we need, to be who we are. I said those backwards. Be who we need and become who we are. Anyway, Want to Know is the name of my Substack newsletter, this project in particular. I emphasize the want to know so much because it, I think, harks to the kind of like embodied feeling of desire, the longing, the craving, the yearning even. It might even feel at times like a desperate need, that we want something so bad and we want to know what it is that we can do differently, or we want to know why is this happening, or we want to know what else is possible. So many things, but that want is intentionally called out in the way that I talk about things, because I want for people to note that there's something deep in us that craves and needs whatever happens next, if we're using our choice and our will and our agency. So even though I called this Want to Know, the other thing that has kind of evolved out of that is that you have to want it to will it. And of course, so much of my work hinges on this will, like the choices that we make. But I don't think we make choices unless we want to do them. When it comes to changing course, going in a different direction, you have to want it to will it. Unfortunately. I'm saying unfortunately because I'm immediately thinking of like, the relationships, the people where there's this pattern of tension or conflict or hurt. And even if people say they don't want that or they don't intend it and they wish it could be different, you have to really want it to be different in order to will the process of changing those behaviors and practicing it. And the practice takes time. You can't just will it to change in an instant. You have to actually move through that process. And I think that the process of change and transformation, from what I've learned, whether it's individual, group, cultural, within organizations, you really have to want to will the transformative process, because it's not always as easy or as quick as people hope it would be when they have an idea of what things could look like. So you have to want it to will it. And sometimes I think people don't want it enough to will it far or hard enough to really see the changes. Okay, that's just the nature of the landscape we're working in. But the want and the will are deeply embodied practices that I think can come from a place of choice, a place from agency. It connects intimately, immediately to the definitions of love that I use as the will to extend. So even like our values are connected in our wanting and our willing. And the when you want it and you will it, then you're going to go through a practice of learning. And I think that if you can hear the pattern or like the energy of everything I just said, there's this intentionality behind it, a directionality. Like you're going to go somewhere. So you have to want that thing, you will yourself into the direction of it, and that becomes the path and the process that you are pursuing. Hi for those who have joined. I'm saying all of that with emphasis because I also feel like there's a kind of a common pattern where a lot of times we learn by looking backwards and we go, oh, what have you learned? What did you learn out of that challenge? Or that was a relationship that happened and it came to its natural end, but I really learned something through that. And we look at the path we've walked that took us through some journey, and if we were conscious and able to incorporate some kind of meaning from it, then we learned through that process. The thing that I wanted to say that I've been like sitting with lately is actually having a lot more explicit intentionality around not just what do you want to know, but what do you want to learn. And maybe that's a more accurate way for me to like kind of phrase everything that I just put so many words around, of posing this question of what do you want to learn, and do you really want to learn it? I have been sitting with that with a lot more energy myself, because I think it's a reframe that could be really useful and probably even healthy, especially when we're thinking in the realms of revolution, liberation, even deepening our most intimate and personal relationships, especially in being who we need and becoming who we are. If everything is a process that takes time, development, practice, then what do we want to learn? I think is like a good question to pose. Or like, what are you willing to learn? What do you want to learn? What are you willing to learn? And it puts a little bit more responsibility, I guess, on the process. But I also think it invites like a really positive note of excitement. I think it puts agency back into our choices of saying, I want to learn how to communicate differently with this sort of person in my life. Or I really want to learn how to nourish myself and my communities. Like, it's good for us to be able to name what we want to learn. And I think aligning that with the vision of what we want our communities to be like, our families to be like, our relationships to be like, our world to be like. And I really love that. I mean, it feels like a little bit more grounded and centered for me, because it gives us something to kind of focus on and attach ourselves to in the midst of so much chaos and so much overwhelm and so much grief. I mean, the news cycle, I don't think is just reflective of the chaos that is meant to like destabilize us. It certainly is overwhelming, and I don't think it's just a political tactic. I think that it's very reasonable to feel that like we are facing some pretty overwhelming conditions right now, and it never leaves me how much tension there can be in feeling like this is very bad. ICE taking over our streets in the United States, just the constant threat of Israel, the climate. I mean, you know what it is. It's a lot. And I know that people, myself included at times, can feel so overwhelmed by it, or maybe even like distraught or distressed, that it's hard to get back to a place of something that feels small, grounded, and meaningful, purposefully attached with focus here, because we know that it is actually aligned and matches up with where we want to be going, despite everything, because of all of the negative stuff that we are faced with. So, okay, where am I? Choosing intentionally what we want to learn, I think, is a good question for us to sit with. And in the midst of, huge challenges that will take time to redirect or put on a different course, that process of getting there is one that I feel like many folks are going to be impatient with. And it's hard to be patient, not because I want us to like sit around and wait, but patience in the sense of practice. I know that in my learning over the past several years, in addition to learning being a major theme, another major theme is the time that it takes to develop, or the time that it takes to become and be different. And that inherently necessitates a process. So being in the process is something that we can't skip that step, and we can't dismiss it as crucial, and we can't try to push it along, because that is literally how we build the things. Like, again, AI didn't happen overnight. It took a long process to get there. And so seeing and appreciating the process it'll take for us to get somewhere very different, radically different, means that we just have to be in it as it's happening without expecting that immediate gratification of things suddenly shifting, as much as we would want that to be, maybe. Okay, all of this, despite it seeming maybe a little bit like all over the place, I'm going to trust is going to land us right where I wanted us to go, which is, again, going to this relationship with the universe that I've been talking about for several years now. And I wanted to share about how I've developed my relationship with the universe, because it does sound so woo-woo, like disconnected and like, I don't know, like it's just this it's something some people say to feel very much in the clouds. I am not saying it that way. And so let me just be specific. I don't know how everybody else uses it, but I want to share how I have built my relationship with the universe. I'm seeing a lag in my internet, and so there might be something going on here that's funky. And maybe that's the universe talking. Okay. Let me put a cautionary note on this. And let me take a sip from my new favorite cup. Hold on. See my cuties? I made this. Okay, like most things, I do think that people can delude themselves into wishful thinking, or what other language you use, spiritual bypassing, toxic positivity, all of the stuff. We can use a lot of language to say we're doing this without actually doing it. And so we could say that is just the universe, in the same way that I get like real mad about people, saying like everything happens for a reason without it actually attaching to something like that there really is a reason for why this happened. Hopefully, if you've been following along by now, you know that like very little of what I do is making room for this kind of nonchalance about what actually happens. So I do acknowledge that there are people who might say the universe wills in a way that feels very disconnected and kind of like throwing our own role into the wind. And that is not what I'm saying. Okay, I'm going to stop with the cautionary notes. When I'm talking about building a relationship with the universe, it is so concrete and so tangible in my everyday life. And part of it, I'm going to do the spoiler now. This is bad storytelling. Let me just start with the end and do the spoiler. Part of it, of what I've learned, is that the universe is actually, it's become a helpful kind of metaphor, if you will. I don't know the universe, really. But talking about the universe has become a really helpful metaphor that maybe like skips some important steps in cognitive processing that actually puts me in touch with my own self. That might sound really arrogant or self-centered. Like I'm not trying to do like a I am the universe and everything revolves around me kind of thing. But there might be this way that like our brains need a little bit of transmutation or something to be able to make sense of something. And so I do feel like the universe, as I've learned over the past several years, I'm like, oh, this is my relationship with the universe. If I were using therapy speak, it would also land as, oh, I'm in this relationship with the universe, but really I'm reparenting myself. Or I'm in a relationship with myself where I'm trusting myself instead of betraying myself. Or I'm listening to myself instead of ignoring my actual wants and needs and feelings. So just putting it out there that like, I'm okay with that. I'm totally okay with saying the universe, and also having that be kind of like code that maybe my conscious brain doesn't have to process all the time, of me being like, and this is what I actually am doing for myself. I'm in a relationship with myself all the time based on my choices, but here's why that's important. Because if I can externalize in the way that I'm thinking about something by calling it the universe, then I can pay attention to something in a way that is like stepping outside of my own ego, if you will. Like it's not actually about me. Here's a parallel. You know how like in meditation practices, or maybe even like psychedelic journeys, there's often a reference at this point where like suddenly the ego dissolves, or you like are no longer identifying with yourself or as yourself, but something much larger, expansive, interconnected. That's kind of what I'm getting at here. It's a similar way of sort of separating from this sense of just oneself. And if you're like reading the universe and what the universe is telling you, or the messages the universe is sending, or the signals that the universe is like beeping at you to get your attention, then it is a way to sort of like bypass, I think, the way that we can block ourselves if we're just completely locked into our own ego perspectives. I guess. I don't talk about the ego like that very often, so I'm doing my best right now. But the interesting thing is that it's not lost on me that when I'm like, oh my gosh, did you see that serendipity? The way that I was just having that conversation with someone, and then I turned on the television, the first thing that popped up was that big thing that literally happened last night. I texted my brother, and he was like, we're in a simulation. That's his excuse for it. But I was just like, isn't that funny how we had a very explicit, elaborate conversation about a particular phenomenon, and then the first thing that jumps into my own personal space later that night is like explicitly connected to exactly that. Those sort of serendipities happen all the time for me. Maybe this is a matter of neural wiring. I've heard that some neurodivergent minds are much more like programmed or conditioned to see patterns, right? To make the connections, that there's just a picking up of what's happening around environmentally that a lot of people maybe don't see. So maybe that's my experience. Maybe that's what's going on. I see connections constantly, like too much, actually. So it could be that. It could be that that's just the way our brains are wired, some of us. It could be serendipity. It could be our cognitive bias that like I'm primed for it, for now I see it, and now I'm like my attention is going to it. Or it could be the universe speaking. Honestly, I literally do not care whatever the explanation is. That might be shocking for some people that I am always so like, ugh. It doesn't really matter the explanation. The point is that it's happening, whatever meaning we make of it. That's the key for me. So as I've developed my relationship with the universe, I get these signals, these messages, and these little serendipities constantly. But I know on like let me tap back into like my ego voice. I know that really it's me actively engaging in a process of paying attention and making meaning and asking myself, what lesson could I learn here? What can I make of this happening right in front of me? That is, I think, an orientation that I'm not saying I'm alone in that, but I do feel like it's a sort of a mindset, if you will, that people can practice stepping into, of curiosity and like a growth mindset, an open mindset, one that doesn't assume too much or feel scared and defensive of something that they don't quite know, but can kind of be like intrigued and be like, that's interesting. I wonder what else could be revealed if I like explore that a little bit more, instead of just not paying attention, not wanting to, or not following through. It's kind of like, do you want to learn? Then if you do, ask a question. What was that about? That's interesting. And I feel like the reason why that has come up for me in my orientation with the universe, when I say I've been developing this like secure, much more like healthy and trusting relationship with the universe, it's because I have, whether it's me playing brain tricks on myself or just becoming a much more open-minded individual who has greater capacity to learn, whatever it is, it's allowed me to make meaning differently and voluntarily, consciously pay attention so that it feels like, actually, I've talked about this in a different live stream that I did not publish. The process of learning goes like this. It's repetitious. We kind of cycle through over and over again the same things. But the more that I learn, then suddenly it feels like, okay, this is happening more and more. Now it's happening at a greater frequency and maybe even a greater intensity. And at this point now, it's like so much that the momentum and the clarity and the concentration of the learning is like here. So that concentric circle that I was just doing is like, maybe you have to learn something. There's a little ping over here. And then another some span of time goes by and you go, oh, ping, there it is again. Interesting. But pretty soon you start to like see it more frequently or feel it more deeply and pay attention more concertedly because it's like right there in front of you. That to me is reflective of its own process of learning. When you can see something repetitiously, the pattern is clear. You're seeing it even more frequently. maybe it's not that it's happening more frequently, it's that I've learned enough to be able to spot it, to be able to see it, to the point where now actually, once we get to this like core where it's much more concentrated, the momentum is stronger, it feels like weightier, maybe even something you're going, I don't know why I'm so visual today, you can like grab it, like this is the lesson. That might be actually when you get to a place of integrating it to a point of understanding, to a deeper sense of knowing, not just the learning process, which is like, I don't quite know yet, but it starts with this like, that was interesting, way out here in the periphery, until it becomes something that becomes so like central. You're like, I can't ignore this anymore. In fact, I've seen it, I've continued to like get reacquainted with it, that now I can hold it in my imaginary hand. So that learning, whether it's the universe, whether it's with me, I don't know. Of course it's with me too. But I think that I said something recently. I've started working with a new therapist out of the curiosity of like, what would happen if I've done all this work and now I meet a new person and we start doing a different kind of therapeutic relationship? How might that change the work that gets done? That's a curious question. So I've been exploring it 3 weeks in now. And it's kind of funny because I also was reminded that like when you meet a new therapist, I had one therapist who was like, you shouldn't trust me yet. You don't know me. I'm like, really? I sort of thought you should have just always trust your therapist. That was like the point. But no, it's not. You have to like develop and build that relationship. So I don't know that we're there yet with me and this new therapist, but I told her this past week about relationships. And I was like, I have been not in a deep, intimate partnership in a very long time. It's actually kind of throwing a wrench in my reputation. I think a lot of people know me to be always in some sort of like intimate connection with someone. And that has happened for many decades in many different various forms. But I would say overall, the past like 7 or so years have been the most like single that I've been, even though I've learned a lot of lessons from a lot of folks and with folks in different capacities. Yes. But my deepest, strongest, longest relationship has been with the universe over the past several years. That's how we got here. But I told this therapist that I know and I get why we always say that like you learn a lot in relationships with other people, that people are really just going to be a mirror to whatever comes up in you. And it will give you an opportunity to say like, that thing happened, but what is this actually like revealing or uncovering about myself? Because if something gets triggered or activated, maybe it's not so much the other person doing it, but there's something in me that is responding to that. And so, not an unfamiliar notion that everybody is just a mirror back to you to be able to help like reflect something about yourself to pay attention to. Talk about like egocentric. If everybody's just a mirror to us, like we're all just obsessed with ourselves. I don't love that. But I mean, I hope you understand like that there is a level of curiosity that we can ask that isn't just like, what are you doing? But instead being like, what in me is responding here? Or what is a need that maybe I'm not paying attention to? And I think that's good for us always to kind of be reflecting. It's self-reflective, if not like self-absorbed. We don't have to go that far. But I told my therapist that like, not having that kind of persistent partnership with another person, which I do think there's like incredible value, like a beautiful experience to be in a long-term committed partner with someone who you've grown with over years or decades. Like that to me is a very important part of our human experience that not everybody has access to, and it's not the only way to learn, but it's a good channel for a certain specific degree of learning. But, it can happen with a stranger. It can happen with a short-term relationship. All of our relationships can be these opportunities, like the ground from which we can learn so much. And I think that what I've said was like, if we don't have a person or people in our direct contact, it's making me sound like I'm a hermit, that I'm very isolated. I swear I'm not. I have people around me. I have plenty of people to reflect opportunities for me to learn. But my point was just that, like, if I don't have a partner, then I really am grateful for the fact that I've sort of put this onto the universe to be my long-term committed partner in the learning. And it's fun to be able to say, oh, that is the universe showing me something. And it doesn't just have to be like, oh, I got triggered by my partner again. Am I the asshole, or is there something here for me to pay attention to? it's actually opened up a different kind of playful dynamic for me to have more wonder of being like, oh, because there's surprise if it's coming from the universe. Like, I actually get to, in a way, situate myself as like an open, willing recipient to whatever the universe wants to show me. And it has become really fun, honestly. There's an element of surprise that I think has loosened up any predilection I might have for like control or needing to feel like I have a sense of control, because you can't control the universe. You might be able to attempt to control your partner in a pretty manipulative and toxic way if you are not paying attention to that, but you can't control the universe. You know what I mean? So this has been one of the ways that it's been really like healthy and helpful for me to just kind of like orient myself to like, well, what is the universe showing me? Especially if I have grown to expect it. And I think that that's another thing. It's like the same kind of like, what do you want to learn? You don't have to be hit with like, oh, fuck, another lesson. We always come to this conflict. And I think about partnerships and relationships where there's sort of like persistent problems. And it can be this thing where it's like, are we ever going to learn this thing? Probably not. It'll always be an issue. But you might want to try to like, I don't know, stop it from ever happening. Or the goal, assumed goal could be like, let's stop this. But when it comes to being in a relationship with the universe, like, I'm open to the surprise, and I also have a lot more humility to be like, I am sure there is so much I do not know. I hope and wish for myself and so many other people for us to be able to orient that same kind of attitude to other people in our relationships. I think that is very important and healthy. It could be a good model. But this putting it on the universe, I think, is like, again, an easier way to step outside of our own ego and defensiveness and be like, it's the universe speaking, though. The universe has this like vast power and possibility that I cannot comprehend. So of course I'm going to be open to surprise. Of course I might be more humble of what I do not know, what the universe could teach me. If you're hearing it, and I hope it's getting like painfully obvious, that is also true in our relationships with other people. I believe that. It's just that I think it's harder for people to don that attitude when it comes to another human who is imperfect or complicated and not so, I don't know, nebulous as the universe, the way we talk about the universe, that thing that helps us maybe make sense of a lesson better. Anyway, I have just noticed that. And those are a couple of examples of like how I've noticed my own constitution shifting by me being able to like consciously embrace and playfully name that like, oh, this is me being in relationship with the universe right now. And I do feel like that has been spacious enough, or my life has been spacious enough because I haven't been in a like partnership that where that learning might otherwise be put on the dynamic shared with another human being. It's been really interesting and kind of like lovely to be able to engage in still constant learning, constant reflection of something being shown. Stuff is always coming up for me. And it doesn't have to happen in the much more like, I think, messy terrain of interpersonal conflict right now. That, again, is not to say that's not important. I think it is. I guess my point is that I have felt myself growing and learning and shifting by engaging in the same kind of practices that I think we need to practice with each other, but doing it in a way with the universe that has felt like a container where my own responsibility to engage in my learning process is like clearly on me. Like, I'm the dum-dum, I'm the idiot, I need to be the one learning the lessons. And if it's a benevolent universe who's never trying to like hurt me or harm me, then I can trust and own like, oh, I still didn't quite get that yet. That to me feels like a door that maybe is more inviting and maybe is like a little bit cleaner, if you will, than what I feel like a lot of people are capable of doing when it becomes that messy interpersonal conflict. The kind of accountability that we need to be able to practice like true liberation in our own relationships. Yes, I agree. But I guess there's like the what happens in between, the being able to actually do it in relationship, to practice in true relationship with one another, and the knowing that it's a thing that we have to do. right there in the middle for me, again, this is my own angle where I kind of land. I see my inclinations going to that, maybe it's like the middle space, right in between, where what really is happening is like the lesson or the learning or the knowing, the understanding, the insight, the new information that is necessary for us to be able to now also practice in an embodied way. I'm not trying to separate them. So much of what we do is learned in embodied practice, yes. But if you can hear it, there is an embodied experience and affective orientation to being able to learn, even when it is with this like metaphorical entity, call it the universe or call it anything else. And I'm saying all this because I just feel like it's been really helpful for my own growth and learning, to be in this space where I feel my lessons, I feel my learning, I am in my body, I'm inviting it, and it has truly shaped me, like in a very palpable kind of way. And I feel very confident and believe that because of the learning and the transformation that I've done in the past few years in light of this process and how I've like moved through it, that I am much more equipped to be in relationships with the people who are in my life. That I can make different choices and show up differently. And I feel that I register my own shifts on a very regular basis. Even just in the past few weeks, I'm like, oh wow, I actually feel different about that. And that to me, again, is like the evidence of healing, that we can encounter something, consciously choose to move through it differently or respond differently, and that we feel less negatively, affectively triggered by the whole thing, so that we can maintain the space and the conditions for the connections that we have, the relationships that we do really want to protect and nourish. And they feel less threatened by the inherent messiness of our human complexities. So going all the way back to like the other work that I see people doing that I really, really value, respect, and learn a lot from. I have done so many attempts at interventions when it comes to culture building, when it comes to leadership development, and like shared learning among people, especially in organizations. This is from like the years of consulting, the years of trying to build cultures where people can move together based in like statements that we have the same visions, we have the same values, so how do we translate into what we do? My experience has been that like getting in the messiness of where the people actually now like bump into each other and have all their shit come up is so complicated. Like it is truly so complicated. Yes, there's conflict. Yes, there's hurt. Yes, people get harmed. And the defensiveness and protection and denial and like, the messiness of how people respond to that is like egregious. So yes, thank you to everybody who navigates that space in that realm of like what feels like the ring for gladiators. I don't even know. Like emotional coliseum of all of our conditioning, based in oppressive systems, and all of the messages that come from the top and from the bottom in terms of like our guts of what makes us as humans so much our greatest barrier to changing the world and the nature of our reality. I've been in those spaces. I have wrestled in that mud so much too. And I think it's because of those experiences that I have been trying to kind of like carve out a different path of like, what else do we need? What maybe is missing here? Because people need to be in that messy realm of like really wrestling with the feelings and the shit that comes up in our relationships. Yes, I'm not trying to be avoidant here and say like we can't address that with accountability. Yes, we need to. But for me, it's always landed on like the conditions and the capacities and the skills and like a deeper understanding of what's really happening in this space, what's really at stake in this space. And again, this could just be the way that I learn. Like, I'll own it. I am one of those processors where like I want to understand something so that when I'm doing it, I can make meaning of it. It's like feedback only becomes meaningful when you understand what you're looking at and where you're trying to go. So like I need more context. I need more information to be able to locate myself in my own process and be like, oh, I can see that, yeah, that was where it was a little rough. Because I have something that I can distinguish it against. No, does that make sense? And that is why I find myself in this place of like knowing, what can we know from each other? What can we learn from being in close, intimate relationship with ourselves and each other? The epistemology of intimacy is one of learning and knowing, but with intentionality, not just from and through our relationships, but also so that we can build more meaningful, deeper connections that become the groundswell from which we build more large scale liberated spaces. So I'm totally in line with those who say like liberation starts within our relationships. Hard agree, yes. And that is because when we can figure out how to be with ourselves and each other in truly liberatory ways, then I feel like that is where everything else pours out from. I just am so curious about how hard that can feel and how difficult it is and how rife with conflict it becomes. And when I say conflict, I'm meaning the tendencies for like shame, for denial, for like, there's just, we have so many emotions that come up and get in the way of this. And I mean, I see it, I feel it. Please know that everything I'm saying right now is truly rooted in like very real experiences of my own life, even just in the past few weeks. Like everything I say is never not grounded. There was a lot of weird ways to phrase that. Whatever I'm saying, it's always grounded in my actual experiences. That if there's one thing to get from this, it's like that. I'm always trying to make meaning of what's happening. And you can say because I'm paying attention to the universe, or because I'm just like noting what is literally happening and trying to learn from it. Okay. I probably could say more about the relationship with the universe, but I'm realizing I've been going for over an hour now and I did not anticipate doing that. So instead, I want to make a connection to a couple of things because I'm not going to be doing another live for a couple of weeks. One, I'm not doing a live for a couple of weeks because good stuff is happening for the rest of July. It's just a huge month. I knew it was going to be so busy and so intense. And so I have prior commitments for Wednesday next week. I'm involved in something that is really important to me, and we have a call around this time. So I'm just going to be on that call instead. And then the following week, I'm going to be meeting with people across the state at this huge convening. I think it's like 700 people from the state of Colorado, and I'm thrilled for this opportunity. I'm so grateful for the opportunity to be there. And I hope to learn a lot. But the person that I want to be in that space is this version of myself that is working on new pages for Romancing the Revolution. I created 3 new ones after like the 150 page packet. And the 3 new ones are, I'm trying to challenge myself to be more honest. I call my pages. And then I write these letters that I call honest letters to people. And I found myself in the past week referring to them as like honest pages, that I feel like that's a way that I'm trying to move into. Like I want to be writing honest pages. And that looks like there's a different voice that's coming through in that. It's layered and there's so many meanings, and I'm like, this has got to be annoying for other people, and maybe most people won't get it, that when I'm writing something, I find myself being like, there are 3 ways to read that phrase, and I mean all of them. And I wonder if anybody will pick up on all 3. So anyway, I've been working on those pages, and I want that to be one path that I continue going down. So when I am in these spaces in the weeks ahead, that's a priority area that I have. I'm like, I want to be a person who writes honest pages, and that is what I share and how I connect. That couples with For the Love of Strangers. And I've been sitting a lot with that of like, what is it about For the Love of Strangers? I'm bringing it up now because the next one happens on Friday. And I've decided to focus on this theme of loving perceptions. And it's just so much like braided in with all of these themes of accountability, abolition, liberation in our real relationships, how we know each other. it's like it is the bread and butter of so much of what I'm doing. And so for the love of strangers, like as a container, the way it was designed was always about helping people be able to meaningfully connect or learn ways to meaningfully connect through stories about meaningfully connecting. And the way that that has evolved in the past year and a half is actually, I'm finding myself wanting to lean into more philosophical engagements around what it takes to be free, what it takes for us to be who we need. And I love that it's evolving in terms of my approach, the container. But I think that what I'm noticing right now is that this is the container that feels so valuable for me to continue pouring into, precisely because it has that shared thematic foundation about our relationships and how we really connect with each other, even strangers, even people in our communities. And like I started with this, like the interesting slice that is starting to carve out from that I'm feeling really excited about is that there's this like what we know from those connections. So even in creating For the Love of Strangers, this week's theme, or this next container's theme on loving perceptions, is still going to raise all these questions of like, so what do we know? How do we know from the different modes of seeing and being seen? And I will put a spoiler on this because I don't know how many people are going to see this before Friday happens. Probably very few, if not just one or two. But I also am really excited to flip that question of, it's not just how are we seen by people, but how do we want to see others? And that is a question of loving perception, like to see and be seen, but with a loving eye. So I'm really excited about it. And I just wanted to throw that out there since I will not be coming back in the next couple of weeks. And who knows what will transpire between now and August, literally, when it will be time for me to jump back on here. And I might forget, or so much might happen that I might be like, oh, we've got other things to like update on. Anyway, I guess that's that. Yeah, thank you for being here. I hope that this is interesting. Maybe if I'm really curious about how other people are processing the world right now and moving through their relationships, and if the universe is a helpful metaphor for you to continue being more open and secure and like confident and trusting and full of faith and curiosity for how to continue growing, then keep being in relationship with the universe. I hope it continues to be as secure and strong and loving and loyal and supportive as it has been for me in the past couple of years to help me become a better version of myself and more like who I want to be. All right, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you. I appreciate you being in this process, and I'm excited to see you in a couple of weeks in August. Be well, take good care of you and others, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.